Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the latest mission from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. And Will Robinson Smith will be providing our commentary for the duration of this coverage. We are broadcasting, as we always do, from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, is running the technical operations of the broadcast this morning. Adam Bernstein preparing to track the rocket as well as do some still photography. Michael Keane has the morning off, but maybe popping in periodically to check in the live chat. So if you see him, be sure to say hello. In the meantime, if you'd like to follow the fellas on social media, you can find them at their handles here. Adam is at ABurnNYC, Michael Keane at MD Keane Jr. While you're over there, be sure to follow Spaceflight Now, simply at Spaceflight Now. We'll also be joined by our friends Pete Carsons with Max Q Productions and Chuck and Jen Briggs with C&J Images, assistance with tracking the rocket. In the center of your screen, you're taking a look at SpaceX's workhorse vehicle, the Falcon 9 rocket. This mission is set to be the 85th Falcon 9 launch so far in 2024 as we kick things off in the month of September. To all of you joining in from our American audience, I hope you all had a wonderful, restful Labor Day weekend. If you were fortunate enough to have Monday off and embrace the holiday here. To everyone else around the world, hope the weekend was also restful as well. Good to have you back here midweek as we're looking towards the launch of this Falcon 9 rocket with 21 Starlink satellites on board. Currently, SpaceX is targeting a T0 liftoff time of 12:07 p.m. Eastern. Those joining around the globe, that is 16:07 QTC. This is the Starlink Group 8-11 mission, set to be the 61st dedicated flight for SpaceX's Starlink satellites so far in 2024. As we get things going here, I want to thank the about 990 of you who are joining with us live to kick things off. If you haven't already, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could hit that like button for us. It allows the YouTube algorithm to realize that y'all are here and engaged and bring some more folks into our live coverage, and that certainly will be appreciated. We are also powered by a wonderful channel member community here on YouTube, so thanks to folks like Sulfur for Lunch, Mark Otto, Clever Girl, Carl Northeast, Deborah Reese, and many others. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop.spaceflightnow.com, access to member-only videos here on YouTube, and of course the ability to watch all of our launch liftoff moments from here on Florida Space Coast in 4K. As we get things going, I want to thank one of our moderators in the live chat for A, for work as a moderator, and B, for gifting 5 Spaceflight Now memberships. So thanks to you, Clistia, and good to see you this late morning. And a thanks to Carl Northeast, another channel member, for gifting a Spaceflight Now membership as well. So to our newest 6 channel members, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you with us. We hope you stick around and enjoy your time here while you're a member, and hopefully like to extend that membership as we continue on through the launch here. Last but not least, if you have a comment or question related to this launch or other happenings in the realm of spaceflight, your comment or question is appropriate to be read on the show. We'd love to bring you into the chat here as we continue on through the countdown. Not only will you give us some interesting things to talk about through this process, but you'll also be supporting what we do here at Spaceflight Now, and that is always greatly appreciated. And with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and continue to talk about this mission as we're approaching the point where the SpaceX launch director will make the call on the start of propellant load. SpaceX is running its countdown from the Hangar X site here at the Kennedy Space Center. It's the facility where they refurbish Falcon boosters and prepare them for future flights, as is the case with the booster you see here on your screen. That is tail number B1077, making its 15th launch today. We'll have a little bit more in its backstory as we get closer to T0. SpaceX also has support for this launch, in part from the control room at their headquarters in Hawthorne, California. Again, this lunchtime launch is set to lift off from Pad 48 Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, targeting 12:07 p.m. 12:07 p.m. Eastern, that is 16:07 UTC for folks around the globe. If for whatever reason SpaceX is not able to hit that liftoff point at 12:07 Eastern, they do have backup opportunities lasting until pretty much the top of the next hour, 12:59 p.m. Eastern, 16:59 UTC. That is if they have not started fueling. Once liquid oxygen and RP1 or rocket-grade kerosene start flowing onto the Falcon, then that T0 time is locked in. If for whatever reason, though, SpaceX is unable to launch today for whatever reason, they do have a 24-hour backup opportunity. The launch window opening up on Thursday, September 5th. That first T0 beginning at 8:35 a.m. Eastern. Coming into today's launch opportunity, the outlook is pretty favorable for SpaceX. The 45th Weather Squadron forecasts a 70% chance of favorable weather. Put another way, a 30% chance of violating weather conditions during this launch opportunity. Taking a look at the wide shot here, you can see some of the clouds that have been hanging around Florida's Space Coast throughout the morning as we're cruising on into the noontime hour in about 45 minutes. 45th Weather Squadron says they are tracking the presence of cumulus and anvil clouds as the potential watch items for today. If SpaceX does need to recycle its launch opportunity and pivot to Thursday, September 5th, from a weather standpoint, it is essentially the same. 30% chance of violating conditions with the same two watch items, those anvil and cumulus clouds. We're currently T-minus 50 minutes, 8 seconds and counting. Let's go ahead and talk about the countdown timeline. Some of the milestones that we're looking for as SpaceX gets into the fueling process of its Falcon 9 rocket. That go for prop load I mentioned a moment ago, that will nominally come about around T-minus 38 minutes. SpaceX does this poll electronically, so if they feel like they're in a good position to do so, they can take that poll a little bit ahead of time. But about T-minus 38 minutes is the standard time when that happens. If that go-ahead is given, prop load begins with two different events happening at the same time. RP1, or rocket-grade kerosene, is loaded on board the Falcon 9's first and second stages. At the same time, liquid oxygen starts flowing on board the Falcon 9's first stage. T-minus 30 minutes, cryogenic helium is loaded on board the pressure vessels for the first stage. Helium is used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. Same process begins on the second stage at about the T-minus 26 minute mark. A few minutes after that, the second stage kerosene tank is full. Then at T-minus 20 minutes and 50 seconds, the strong back chill down process begins. It's the thermal conditioning of the feed lines prior to second stage liquid oxygen loading. About 30 seconds or so after that process begins, or about T-minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds, we'll see the so-called big vent. It's good visual indication that fueling is moving along on time and on track. And at T-minus 16 minutes, that's when the second stage LOX load actually gets underway. T-minus 7 minutes, the engine chill down sequence begins. That involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps. It helps protect the engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. About 6 minutes before liftoff, the first stage kerosene tank should be full. In a T-minus 4.5 minutes, we'll see the strong back retract sequence begin. That process starts with the clamp arms underneath the payload fairings opening up, and then the transporter erector with a strong back will recline about a degree and a half away from the Falcon 9 rocket. It stays in that position until liftoff. At that point, it'll pull back in a much more rapid fashion to clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9 rocket. 3 minutes out the first stage, liquid oxygen tank is full. Same is true for the LOX tank on the second stage about a minute later, and at that point, the Falcon 9 will be fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers. The propellant tanks will be brought up to flight pressure. At that point, you'll hear SpaceX call out that the Falcon 9 is in startup. That's what that call means. 45 seconds out, the SpaceX launch director will give their go for launch call if everything is still on track. The engine ignition command is issued at T-minus 3 seconds. And of course, if all 9 Merlin 1D engines are healthy at ignite, the flight computer will give the command for the hold down clamps to release the Falcon 9 for a T0 liftoff. Again, that's coming up at 12:07 p.m. Eastern, 16:07 UTC, or in T-minus 46 minutes and 13 seconds. Now just about 8 minutes away from the call on the start of fueling the Falcon 9. Currently T-minus 44 minutes, 58 seconds and counting. As SpaceX is preparing for the launch of this Starlink mission in 44 minutes and 32 seconds, meteorologists are also closely tracking the weather in anticipation of the launch of this other Falcon 9 here in Florida, which has been upright for a little while now. This is Falcon 9 with the Crew Dragon Resilience on top, which will eventually support the launch of the Polaris Dawn mission. A roughly 5-day free-flying flight of that Crew Dragon spacecraft and her 4 passengers, during which they'll perform the first commercial spacewalk, travel further from Earth than humans have since the end of the Apollo program, and perform an on-orbit demonstration of the Starlink satellite internet service using laser links on board the Dragon within the trunk. Say the meteorologists have been watching this closely because ever since the initial ground-side systems issue that caused SpaceX to hold off on launching back just over a week ago on Tuesday, ever since then, they've been pushing off this launch because of concern with the weather, not at liftoff, but at landing. Since this mission is a free flyer, they need to closely track the return time before they launch. And up to now, the splashdown conditions have not been favorable for a liftoff of the Polaris Dawn mission. And so they will continue to keep an eye on that as they're looking to launch this mission, ideally before the pad needs to be turned over from a Falcon 9 to a Falcon Heavy configuration in support of the upcoming Europa Clipper mission to the moon of the same name, Europa, orbiting Jupiter, one of its 94 moons. That mission has a launch window which opens up on October 10th, which seems like a far distance off. However, it does take SpaceX a few weeks to convert from a Falcon 9 to a Falcon Heavy configuration. Did reach out to NASA's Launch Services Program, or LSP, which is based here at the Kennedy Space Center. They're responsible for contracting these mission launches and the launch vehicles spacecraft will be heading off on. Got this statement from Tim Dunn, who's the senior launch director, who said, and I'll quote him here, SpaceX continues to improve and reduce the Launch Complex 39A pad conversion process timelines when changing configuration between Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy. LSP will utilize these improvements for the Europa Clipper mission. The exact number of days required for the configuration change have not been finalized, but it will be less than 25 days, end quote. Just for some context, a 25-day term between, or leading up to that October 10th date would put this pad needing to flip over no later than September 12th. But again, as Tim Dunn said, they require something less than 25 days, although how much less, not entirely clear. So we will continue to track the Polaris Dawn mission and its forthcoming departure, and hopefully splashdown conditions will be such that this mission will be able to move forward sometime in the next week or so, in order to avoid a potential schedule clash with the upcoming Europa Clipper mission, which doesn't have too terribly long of a launch window itself. And so obviously NASA would want to preserve the entirety of that. Since this is a big mission for the agency coming up. Meanwhile, back here at Pad 40, we're T-minus 39 minutes, 48 seconds and counting to liftoff. Just about 2 minutes away from the point, generally speaking, when SpaceX will make the call on the start of prop load. We'll go ahead and keep tabs on SpaceX for any comments confirming that propellant load has in fact begun. Taking a look at the live chat briefly here. Want to welcome in Greg Jazz Jr. joining us the channel membership at the mission specialist level. Really appreciate that, Greg. Glad to have you aboard. And thanks to Calistia Lee again for gifting another 5 Spaceflight Now memberships. Really appreciate that, Calistia. And to our newest 5 channel members, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you with us. Of course, it's always a busy time, it seems like, covering the comings and goings of space activities, in addition to this launch that we're tracking here for Starlink 8-11 mission coming up in about 30 or so minutes. NASA will be holding a press conference at the Johnson Space Center regarding the departure of the Starliner spacecraft without crew. That's coming up on At the end of this week, NASA nominally looking at an undocking on the evening of Friday, September 6th, with a touchdown at White Sands in New Mexico just after midnight on Saturday, September 7th. Some of the speakers coming up on that will be Steve Stitch, the manager of NASA's Commercial Crew Program, Dana Weigel, the manager of NASA's International Space Station Program, and Anthony Perea, the flight director, or one of the flight directors for the International Space Station, presumably who will be on console during the departure of Starliner. Currently T-minus 36 minutes, 54 seconds and counting. At this point, if SpaceX is in a position where it feels like it's ready to move forward with the launch, it will have given that go-ahead for the start of prop load, set to begin in now less than 2 minutes. Currently T-minus 34 minutes, 38 seconds and counting. At this point, SpaceX will have given the go and started proceeding with prop load if it is in fact ready to do so. Getting a little bit of heat haze here, so it's going to be slightly tricky to see the frost line that we normally do here. Take a look over from our friend Chuck and Jen Briggs. In the next minute or so, start to see a little bit of vapor form near the base of the Falcon 9 rocket as the super cold densified liquid oxygen is loaded on board the tanks on the Falcon 9's first stage. Again, assuming that fueling is officially in work. Standing by for visual indication of that or word from SpaceX that fueling is currently happening. For a T minus for a T minus zero liftoff time of 12:07, they would need it to be about 5 or so minutes into fueling now at this point, coming up on 5 minute mark. Given the haze, it's quite difficult to tell from a visual standpoint, and so far SpaceX hasn't commented on the start of fueling. So far, SpaceX has not made any official statements on the start of fueling at this point. While it is still quite hazy, 5 minutes in, evidence of fueling would be a bit more apparent at this point. We do have a word from SpaceX in the last 10 seconds or so. They do confirm, and I'll quote them here, all systems are looking good and propellant load has started for today's launch of 21 Starlink satellites, including 13 with direct-to-cell capabilities. However, they also note, I'll go back to quoting them here, quote, teams are keeping an eye on weather in the recovery area. So while difficult to see visually, SpaceX does say that fueling is underway, which is committing them to a T0 liftoff time of 12:07. If you take a close look at the live pictures you're seeing here on your screen, look down near the base of the Falcon 9. where the transporter erector starts to taper in between that point and the lightning tower immediately to its left. Before you get to the crew access tower, you can just barely make out a little bit of vapor in that part of the frame. Again, lighting conditions, I know, making it difficult to discern that, but are seeing some now discernible puffs of vapor there. Again, as SpaceX notes, though, they are, quote, keeping an eye on the weather in the recovery area. And we will, of course, keep you updated if they decide that that recovery weather is just too much to push forward with today's mission and they decide to pivot to that 24-hour backup. Take a look at the wide camera here at the press site. You can see some of the clouds hanging around the launch site. But again, it sounds like launch liftoff weather, not the potentially limiting item here. We'll continue to keep tabs on that, of course. I want to thank the more than 3,200 of you who are joining with us live as we continue to track the progress of this Falcon 9 rocket. If you haven't already, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could hit that like button for us. Allow some more folks to find their way in, and hopefully this launch happening at a time where there's a good number of people, at least here on the East Coast, who are stepping into a lunch break and take a little time away from work to enjoy a launch of a Falcon 9 rocket this afternoon. Currently T-minus 24 minutes, 14 seconds and counting. As we are waiting for the 15th launch of this particular booster, tail number B1077 in the SpaceX fleet. Let's go ahead and wind the clock back a little bit, talk about its path to getting to this particular mission. Its first flight was a crew mission. That was the Crew 5 flight for NASA, heading up to the International Space Station with a liftoff on October 5th, 2022. Launched the Dragon named Endurance. Distinct for a couple of reasons, this mission was commanded by NASA astronaut Nicole Mann, who became the first indigenous woman to go to space. It was also the first time a Russian cosmonaut flew to the ISS on board a SpaceX Dragon spacecraft. Next launch came on January 18th, 2023, the launch of the GPS-3 Space Vehicle 6 satellite. The series of GPS satellites were manufactured by Lockheed Martin and nicknamed for famous explorers SV-06 was named Amelia Earhart. Launch number 3 was a month later on February 18th when it launched the Inmarsat 6F satellite. That was followed up on March 29th when it launched 56 Starlink satellites on the Starlink 5-10 mission. Launch number 5 happened to be on June 5th, sending up a cargo Dragon spacecraft this time on SpaceX's 28th Commercial Resupply Services, or CRS-28 mission. It sent more than 7,000 pounds of research and supplies up to the orbiting outpost. There were also a pair of rollout solar arrays on board too, now helping to provide additional power to, as NASA astronaut Butch Wilmore calls it, the big city in the sky. 7th, 8th, and 9th launches were all Starlink missions. Those were Starlink, or excuse me, jumping ahead of myself. Launch number 6 was on August 3rd when it launched the Galaxy 37/Horizons 4 satellite for Intelsat, part of the company's constellation to refresh them, meeting FCC requirements. Then moving on ahead, the 7th, 8th, and 9th launches were Starlink missions, beginning with Starlink 6-13 on September 1st, Starlink 6-25 on October 30th, and 6-33 on December 7th. Flight number 10 was the launch of Northrop Grumman's Cygnus spacecraft on the NG-20 mission, part of that company's Commercial Resupply Services 2 contract with NASA, bringing science supplies up to the ISS, the first time that Falcon 9 launched a Cygnus spacecraft. All of its most recent flights, though, this booster, have been on Starlink missions. Those included Starlink 6-43 on March 10th, 6-51 on April 17th, 6-63 on May 24th, and finally, most recently, 10-4 on July 28th. We are currently T-minus 20 minutes, 52 seconds away from its 15th launch. But before we get to that point, we're coming up on the start of the so-called big vent here, as they thermally condition the feed lines ahead of second stage liquid oxygen loading. And there you see the big vent kicking off right on track. This venting set to last until about T-minus 16 minutes and 30 seconds. We're now T minus 17 minutes, 27 seconds and counting. Got a little less than a minute remaining on this so-called big event before it wraps up. Taking a look at the live chat, want to thank the now more than 5,400 of you who are watching with us live. Appreciate you being here around lunchtime for folks on the East Coast or wherever you happen to be joining us today. If you haven't already, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could hit that like button for us to allow the YouTube algorithm to bring this live coverage to a few more people as we continue to step on through the count. Be very much appreciated. Also want to thank SG for a $5 super chat. Good to see you this afternoon, SG. The thumbs up Corgi for encouragement. Always love to see it. And welcome to Patty Chichio. And apologies, Patty, if I mispronounced your last name there, but appreciate you joining us with channel membership at the pad leader level. Welcome aboard. Glad to have you with us. We're currently T minus 16 minutes and counting. At this point, SpaceX is beginning to load the Falcon 9's second stage with liquid oxygen. As we are getting ready to see this rocket ascend to the skies above Florida's Space Coast, let's go ahead and talk about where it's going to be flying. Let's talk a little trajectory, shall we? This mission, Starlink 8-11, heading up to the eighth shell of the SpaceX Starlink mega constellation, means that when it lifts off from this pad, Space Launch Complex 40 or Slick 40, here at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, it's going to be flying in a northeasterly trajectory, so heading up along the east coast of the United States. Pretty bright at this time of day, so the likelihood that a lot of folks outside of Central Florida may be able to see this is probably pretty slim. But keep your eyes skyward and maybe you'll get lucky as it climbs uphill. Following stage separation, the first stage booster B-1077 is going to be landing on the SpaceX drone ship. Just read the instructions. Hoping to make its 15th landing after its 15th launch today. Of course, the other SpaceX drone ship on the East Coast, shortfall of gravitas, still in Port Canaveral after it got an unfortunately hard landing with the SpaceX booster B-1062 ending its 23 mission record-breaking run. So unclear exactly when shortfall of gravitas will next be available to head back out to sea to support future Falcon missions. But for now, just read the instructions. We'll take the charge here. This is set to be the, let's see, the 91st booster landing on this particular drone ship if successful today. SpaceX also looking to recover the payload fairings from this mission as it saves about $6 million per recovery effort. Those fairings splash down under the support of parachutes. And the recovery vessel Bob is out there in the Atlantic as well, getting ready to scoop those up and bring them back into port. This recovery vessel Bob and the other main one, Doug, named after former NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley, the duo who flew aboard the Demo 2 mission for SpaceX, beginning its crewed flights of the Dragon spacecraft back in May of 2020. This is what it looks like as the fairing halves are brought back on board one of those recovery vessels. Currently T minus 12 minutes, 3 seconds, and counting. Want to thank channel member Grandpa Jim Pondu for being a channel member for 2 months. Really appreciate that, Grandpa Jim. It says, go SpaceX. It's always wonderful to see some of those super long month milestones, but also really great to see folks that are marking their 1 or 2 or 3 month as well. Channel membership powers what we do here at Spaceflight now, so it's very heartwarming to see those who continue on with channel membership and continue to get value out of what we do here on the channel and on our website as well. I should mention spaceflightnow.com. Be sure to keep that bookmarked and check in periodically on the launch schedule. We keep that as up to date as possible, let you know when future launches are coming your way, and of course, if there are landings in the process as well. As we mentioned at the top of the broadcast, SpaceX is looking to launch its 85th Falcon 9 rocket with a Starlink 8-11 mission today. Let's go ahead and talk about the workhorse vehicle, which stands at 70 meters or 229 feet tall. It has a diameter of 3.66 meters or 12 feet. Majority of that is made up by the Falcon 9's first stage, bottom 2/3 of the rocket. As we mentioned, this particular booster, B1077, has made 14 flights before, looking for number 15 in about 10 minutes. At the base of the first stage are 9 Merlin 1D engines, which burn rocket-grade kerosene and liquid oxygen, producing 1.7 million pounds of thrust. Around the engine compartment are black carbon fiber landing legs, which will be used to land the first stage on the drone ship, Shortfall of Gravitas. Above the first stage is the inner stage. This is a composite structure consisting of an aluminum honeycomb core that's surrounded by carbon fiber. And the image you see there on the right-hand side of your screen are the deployable hypersonic grid fins. These are titanium winglets that provide stability and steering for the Falcon 9 as it comes back through the atmosphere tail first like a big old dart towards the drone ship. At the top of the inner stage are 3 mechanical latches that attach to the Falcon 9's second stage. At first stage, main engine cutoff, high-pressure helium is used to release those latches. 4 pneumatic pushers ensure clean separation. The second stage engine nozzle is also housed safely inside the interstage adapter until stage separation. Speaking of that second stage, the upper stage of the Falcon 9 is powered by a single modified Merlin engine called a Merlin vacuum engine, or an MVAC engine. It's equipped with a large nozzle, which is optimized for burns in the vacuum of space, hence the name. During its ignition, the Falcon 9's upper stage burned about 220,500 pounds thrust. It'll be fired twice on today's flight, placing the 21 Starlink satellites into their intended orbit. Same as the first stage, the upper stage also burns LOX and RP-1. Following Starlink satellite deployment, it will have a third and final burn called a deorbit burn, driving the upper stage back into the atmosphere where it will burn up and help eliminate the risk of creating unnecessary space debris on this mission. At the very top of the rocket are the payload fairings, which are encapsulating those 21 Starlink satellites. Fairings are made up of a composite structure, or composite material, I should say, which is 13.1 meters or 43 feet tall, 5.2 meters or 17.1 feet in diameter. The two halves of the payload fairings will be recovered a little further downrange, as I mentioned, using the recovery vessel Bob, and they gently splash down under parachutes. SpaceX is looking to certify both its boosters and its payload fairings for up to 40 flights apiece. And while SpaceX doesn't often remark on how many flights its payload fairings have endured, of course, the flight leader for the boosters currently stands at 23 successful launches, 22 successful landings. Speaking of launches and landings, of course, a busy day today as Port Canaveral is now not only the home of the SpaceX drone ship landing platforms, but also Jacqueline, the name for Blue Origin's, what they describe as a sea-based landing platform, where New Glenn's first stage booster will be landing following its missions. Number one coming up next month, if all continues to move forward on track for Blue Origin, sending off the Rocket Lab built, UC Berkeley science provided Escapade twin satellites on their way to Mars. We're now T minus 5 minutes, 50 seconds and counting. At this point in the count, SpaceX has already begun the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines, the process involving flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps. Taking a look at the wide camera here, you can see some of the clouds still hanging around. Do want to note that local weather here for liftoff does remain green, meaning that weather is not an impediment to launch. However, as SpaceX noted in its post a little while ago, around the start of fueling, they are keeping an eye on the recovery area weather. We're now T minus 4 minutes, 19 seconds and counting. At this point, the strong back retract sequence is getting underway. That process involving opening up the clamp arms underneath the payload fairings and then the transporter erector. The strong back reclining about 1.5 degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket. Just want to make a note for the record as we're continuing our countdown now, less than 3.5 minutes, that SpaceX themselves have not started their own launch broadcast providing pad views and mission audio, which is considerably later than their normal start time of about 5 minutes prior to liftoff. Not to say that we should necessarily read any more into that than what it is, but just to note that normally they would be providing video and pad audio at this point. So far, that has not begun. Their broadcast was set to start at 12:02 p.m. Eastern. There's been no statement from SpaceX as to the status of the mission, since they made a note that the start of fueling was getting underway. If in fact they are still on track to launch this Falcon 9 in about 2 minutes, they're approaching the point of liquid oxygen load wrapping up on the second stage. Mission is aborted. We do have word from the Brevard County Emergency Operations Center that they have deactivated their launch operations support team following the scrub of today's mission. Well, we're still awaiting official word from SpaceX on the reason for the scrub and the final minutes of the count. Based off of their previous statement, we can infer that potentially the recovery weather had something to do with it. But again, we'll wait for official confirmation from SpaceX. Once again, if you're just joining us, SpaceX has officially scrubbed the launch attempt of the Starlink 8-11 mission. That's due to, we believe, as they suggested in an earlier post on X, recovery weather. So SpaceX will pivot to their 24-hour backup opportunity. Weather proving tricky for SpaceX on a couple of fronts, obviously. Still keeping the Polaris Dawn mission on the pad, that due as well to recovery weather 5 days after that mission launches, whenever it's able to launch. Weather also now putting the brakes on this Starlink 8-11 mission. Not halting everything happening here on the Space Coast, though. Want to take a look over at our friend Chuck and Jen Briggs' camera view here. Taking a live look right now out at Launch Complex 36 over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. And you're looking right now at the second stage of Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket. Come back to that in just a second, but we do have now official word from SpaceX confirming that, and I quote, due to unfavorable booster recovery weather conditions in the Atlantic, the team is resetting Falcon 9's launch of Starlink for tomorrow, September 5th. So again, SpaceX now confirming that the 24-hour opportunity for this Starlink mission is what they are proceeding with. That window opens up tomorrow morning at 8:35 a.m. Eastern, 12:35 UTC. Our live coverage on this second bite at the apple for this mission will begin an hour before liftoff. Coming back here to Blue Origin in its second stage, they can see here on the big box. Blue Origin notes that it's going to be doing a hot fire test of the two BE-3U engines on the second stage. Yesterday, it noted that the hot fire test was coming up, quote, in a few days. So look for activity to continue ramping up here at the pad as Blue Origin is looking to prepare its rocket for its inaugural launch this year. It's a big year for debut rockets. as of course we saw the first launch of United Launch Alliance's Vulcan rocket back in January. Now Blue Origin getting ready to lift off its New Glenn rocket for the very first time, hopefully in October. As we are beginning to wind down our coverage here, do want to thank a few more folks for your support this afternoon. Want to thank new channel member Patty Chichil for a $2 super chat, saying thank you, Spaceflight Now. Thank you to the mods. As always, appreciate Callisti Lee for her help with our live launch coverage. Also want to thank Ralph Kilcup, marking 2 months as a channel member with the channel, saying, love it when a launch comes together. Pray for a flawless launch and a safe landing. And yes, now we know that potential launch and landing now coming no earlier than tomorrow morning, Thursday, September 5th. In the meantime, we're now just about 10 or so minutes into a news conference from NASA discussing the departure plans for Boeing's Starliner spacecraft, which is set to head off from the International Space Station on Friday afternoon, late afternoon, I should say, with a touchdown at the White Sands facility in New Mexico just after midnight on Saturday. Speakers at the briefing are NASA's Commercial Crew Program Manager Steve Stitch, Dana Weigel, the International Space Station Program Manager for NASA, and Anthony Pareja, one of the flight directors for the International Space Station. As we close out our broadcast here, first off, I want to thank Psychonaut69 for gifting a Spaceflight Now membership. Appreciate that, Psychonaut. And welcome aboard to our newest channel member. Glad to have you with us. We will shortly be turning over our coverage over to our 24-hour live channel, Spaceflight, Launchpad Live, I should say. There you can watch the crew flight test pre-departure news conference, which is Well, we are going to go ahead and sign off for now. Again, appreciate all of you for being here for this launch attempt of the Starlink 8-11 mission. Fortunately, recovery weather happened to scuttle things today. We'll be back with live launch coverage tomorrow morning when SpaceX is ready to try again. Big thank you to Callistia Lee for helping to moderate the live chat, to our friends Chuck and Jen Briggs with C&J Images, and Pete Carsons with Max Q Productions for helping to uh, be ready to track the rocket. To our photographer Adam Bernstein, also being on standby, managing the cameras here at the press site. Stephen Young running the technical operations of the broadcast, and most of all, thanks to you for joining us this afternoon for this launch attempt. And again, we will be back with the next go around tomorrow morning. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others, and we will see you next time, folks. And until then, bye-bye.
Now where they're doing the normal